episode, we are absolutely delighted to welcome Paul Dalton. Paul has been working with us on our corporate work for many, many years. But in addition to his work he does with corporate clients, he is also a professional mindfulness teacher. His goal is to help people live with less stress, because that's part of life, and greater levels of happiness by making mindfulness and meditation part of their daily life. So very, very warm welcome to you, Paul.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Paul is going to bust some of the myths associated with meditation and mindfulness, and he's going to give us all some very simple strategies to incorporate mindfulness techniques into the craziness of our busy lives.
I think that is a really good thing as well, because I'm sure there are many people listening to this who are thinking, mindfulness, this is something I've heard about, but it's a little bit out of my reach. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a bit, isn't that weird thing that people do? Woo-woo. Isn't it that thing that people do when they've got loads of extra time?
Yeah.
Is it just for those people? It's for chilled out people, isn't it not?
But maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
What is meditation and mindfulness, and what is it not?
Well, it is such a great question, and everything you were saying there about mindfulness being a bit woo-woo, a bit out there. I think we have all these memes on the internet. If you do a Google search for mindfulness or meditation, you're going to be bombarded with images of chilled out Zen people sitting on a mountain top, and it just doesn't seem to relate to what we do in our crazy busy lives. So I think with mindfulness there are so many myths and misconceptions. I think the biggest one there is, as you've said, it's how do we fit something like that into our very busy lives, because it seems like it's something that takes a lot of time. And part of the work that I do is to help people see how they can incorporate it into the lives that they've already got. So it shouldn't really take too much time. But if we think about what is mindfulness, a classic definition, if you Google it, you're going to get a plethora of definitions, but all those definitions point to it's really our awareness of what's going on in the moment. A real heavy hitter in the world of mindfulness, someone who's responsible for bringing mindfulness to the West, is a guy called Jon Kabat-Zinn. His definition is mindfulness is the awareness that arises when you pay attention in a particular way. And that's on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally.
So how does being mindful of what is going on help you?
Well, that's a really good question. What we know from the experience of mindfulness, and now all of the research that's being done, is that our brains and minds are so much happier when we're paying attention to something. And we can only pay attention to something in the present moment. So there's a huge study done out of Harvard by Matt Killingsworth, who enlisted thousands of people, gave them an app, and basically the app was 3 questions. And randomly throughout the day, these people would be pinged, and every time they were pinged, they'd have to answer 3 questions. One was, what are you doing right now? Is your mind on it? And on this scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you right now?
Okay.
And it was really interesting that when people said, I'm doing this, and yes, my mind is on it, and how happy are you, they tend to rate themselves a lot happier when they're paying attention in the moment. Even if the task is something that you would typically deem as something being pretty unpleasant. Yeah. So let's say they were doing the washing up or doing some really boring admin work, admin task in their work. The fact that they were present with it in the moment generally rated their happiness as higher.
So Paul, you mentioned, that the brain likes to focus on something, and is the opposite of that focusing your attention on a thought or a story that isn't in the present moment but might be, maybe worrying about something or thinking about something that might be happening tomorrow or the next day. So you're performing a task, but your mind is elsewhere.
Yeah, that, I think when we just reference it to our own experience, how much time do we spend either thinking about the past or thinking about the future?
Yeah.
A lot of that is worrying thoughts or anticipating thoughts. And our nervous system, as we know, can't tell the difference between whether we're, something is happening now or whether it's just in the imagination.
Yeah.
And all the experience of mindfulness over thousands of years, and now the data and the science is really catching up to say that, it really affects our levels of anxiety and stress and worry and rumination when we spend so much time not thinking about what we're actually doing in the present moment. And the data also suggests that even when we're doing pleasant tasks, let's say, for example, we're end of a busy day, we sit down, put on a bit of Netflix, should be enjoyable, but if we're not actually present and there for it, then our happiness levels tend to drop. And the numbers that are coming out, I think, are quite startling, is that when we look at how often people are spending their thinking time, either in the past or in the future or just in fantasy land, it's roughly about 50% of the time.
I think as well, there are so many different things that now try and grab any spare time that we have. So even when you might be watching something on Netflix, you could have your phone there.
Yeah.
There could be, something else going on in the background. The time that we have available is ever diminishing, but actually making space for something mindfulness can actually help you slow down.
And that's
to speed up.
Exactly. And that's really what it's about. I mean, mindfulness is a really vast, rich and deep practice, but essentially when we first start learning mindfulness, we're learning to slow down and we're learning to bring our attention into the present moment. And what that allows us to do is to start to have a bit more agency over what's going on in our minds and in our systems, and really with the view of being able to respond more than we react. I think, so many people watching or listening to this, just referencing back to their own lives and doing a bit of an audit of their day, thinking, how much time am I just reacting to what's happening versus being really aware of what's going on outside, what's going on with me, and then taking a really, I guess, wise, considered response to what we're doing.
I mean, one thought that comes to mind here is when people go to sleep, which is obviously an act of rest. And I can think of someone I know fairly close to home here, mentioning no names, that will go to sleep, doesn't go to sleep, finds it difficult to get to sleep because they're processing so many, particularly if there is a worry, something in the family or something going on, then that is like massive. She will say to me, it took me ages to get to sleep, or I couldn't get to sleep. So this is a good case of it, isn't it? I mean,
really is.
You're really going over the day's events, what people might be thinking, what they're worrying about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Paul, you mentioned a few moments ago, for thousands of years I've been practicing mindfulness. I can honestly say I can only really remember the term mindfulness probably being used on my radar, maybe in the last 20 years, and more so in the last 10.
And actually massively.
Meditation, however, for thousands of years. So tell me a little bit about either the differences or why is this term mindfulness seem to have emerged in the last sort of 10, 20
and
years.
almost overtaken the word meditation.
Yes, it's absolutely true. I think there's a number of reasons why we're hearing much more about mindfulness now, and a big contributing factor, I mentioned someone called John Kabat-Zinn a while ago who came up with this definition of mindfulness. Back in the late 70s, 80s, he was working as a professor in a medical university attached to a hospital, and he was seeing that there was lots of individuals who were running out of options in terms of relieving their suffering related to chronic illnesses and pain. And the doctors were saying, we've done all that we can. There's nothing more that we can do for you. And he was saying, but I know that there's something that I can offer that can help them relate to their pain in a different way. And he wasn't overt in saying, look, these are very ancient Eastern practices, but I want to put this in a very secular way and give you a way of being able to deal with your discomfort in a way where you can live with it more easily. It's not going to make the symptoms necessarily go away. It's not going to cure anything, but what he's looking to do is to teach people how to experience their pain and discomfort in a way where they don't suffer with it so much.
So turning the dial down.
Exactly.
It's interesting because I was listening on the way here to a podcast with Andrew Huberman, and he was actually talking about the placebo effect, but he was really emphasising the huge potential of the brain to relieve the body.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just absolutely fascinating.
It really is fascinating. And when you think about, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because we know that the way that the brain operates and when we're caught up in stress and worry, that kind of has a somatic effect on the body. So when we're practicing things like mindfulness, using these ancient techniques, it does a couple of things. It helps us find a more easeful relationship with the discomfort. And as the body relaxes, we now know through the data and the science that has a positive impact on the genetic markers for inflammation.
Yeah.
So we're really creating an environment in the mind and in the body where inflammation has a more easeful route to dissipate. So not only are we helping ourselves to relate to the suffering in a much more easeful way, but we're creating the environment in the body where the symptoms over time can start to ease.
Yeah.
So I think it's really from that was the genesis of mindfulness in the West.
So that's where it started.
That's where it started.
Yeah, from a medical reasoning, that was the prompt for it, and it's developed from there. So if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, well, I'm pretty happy with my lot. I don't have any pain. I don't have a huge amount of discomfort. Why would I want to spend time on this practice? What are some of the benefits for people to master this practice, or at least try the practice?
Yeah, so I think the big biggie, that, as we've mentioned, the rate of change and the rate of stress in the world, the stress reduction is a huge one.
Well, maybe they're not being mindful of how much stress they've actually got.
Well, this is exactly the thing, and this is how I initially got into mindfulness in the first place, because I think that I'd become so functionally adaptive in relation to my stress that I had no idea how much that was affecting me. And when we think about the quality of our relationships, with our attention being so scattered and all over the place at the moment, we don't have a lot of time and space for relating to each other in a particularly skillful way. A lot of people that I work with come to me for things like stress and sleep and pain, but what they invariably report back after a number of weeks is just the difference that it's made to their relationships at home, how present they are for their kids, and the quality of life that they're experiencing just in their day-to-day. Being able to have that psychological boundary between work and home life.
And particularly when more and more people are working from home since the pandemic. It was interesting, just going back to what you were saying about stress. LinkedIn did a survey recently, and it reported that 70% of people were experiencing stress in every day, or at least portions of their week. Yeah. That's a huge, number of people. So do you think that is why things like mindfulness have come so much to the fore, that things are speeding up, so we need a way of helping counterbalance that?
Exactly. I don't think it's any accident or coincidence that it's happened. When we think about what's happened over the last 20 years, the advent of smartphones and the technology that allows us to be constantly contactable, we have more ways of accessing each other than ever before. The rate of change is just really speeding up, and we haven't, as a species, haven't had a long time to catch up and really adapt to that, and so we're really feeling the effects of it. And I think when then you combine that with a global pandemic and everything that's happening in the world now, and then the economy, and there's so much doom and gloom in the news. It's a lot.
And even
it's a lot for us
like,
to take on.
Even things like, social media, there's the opportunity to compare your existence with other people, day in, day out, and that's a source of stress, as well.
How do you deal with this? If I think about myself, if I start getting a bit stressed, I speed up. I think, well, if I speed up, I'll get this other stuff done, work a bit harder, work a bit faster, work with more intensity. And it's the opposite, really, of the idea of, and I know when we touch on this in our own corporate programs, and we touch on mindfulness or using meditative practices, etc. It's almost like, oh my goodness me, that would be a lovely thing to be able to do. But, the point is, I am so rushed off my feet. The idea of taking 5 minutes out to be calm is like the opposite of the energy. So
it goes against the grain.
How do you notice that a vicious circle?
Yes.
So you're caught up in it.
Yes.
And therefore, the very thing they need is the last thing they want to do.
Yeah.
So how do you convince people that is the thing that would actually help them?
I'm not sure he's going to be able to convince people. You can certainly start to encourage them to move in a different direction.
Yeah. Exactly. I think it's so important with anything like this is you have to meet people where they are.
Right, yeah.
And so where people are is they lead very busy lives. Everything's moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and they're worrying about, 10 or 15 things at the same time. Yeah. So then to say, all right, I want you to stop and I want you to meditate for an hour, it is not going to happen.
No.
So we have to start really gently and you think, can you spend 10 seconds just noticing the breath and give your full attention to one breath. And if you can do that, the question would be, what did you notice was happening in your mind while you gave your attention to that one breath?
So is this, just to interrupt, is this how someone can start to get started?
I think it's a great place to get started.
We're talking about how, if someone's listening and thinking, maybe I should give this a go. Maybe I could benefit from it.
Yeah.
How would people start that process of getting started?
Yeah, my recommendation for people getting started is to, just to find an app and find an exercise, whether that's a meditation exercise or any other mindfulness exercise that takes about a minute or 5 minutes.
Okay.
And just to give it a go. But when you're giving it a go, be willing to give it a fair crack.
Yeah.
Just for that 5 minutes, because it's so easy to go in with that prejudgment of
critical mind.
Exactly.
And
this is our mind's job to prove us right.
Or another thing to tick off the list, like done my mindfulness.
I tried that mindfulness once, and I just couldn't stop thinking about my dad. All I was thinking about was, how would you answer that question? Or but I was there now. I had my eyes closed, and I was trying to do, I was trying to be calm, but all I was thinking about is what I need to do next.
Yeah, exactly. And as a mindfulness teacher, my response to that would be fantastic. Because what happened in that moment is you made a switch from just being reactive to your thoughts and your thoughts carrying you through your day to finding a moment of going, I notice that my thoughts are doing this, and I noticed how difficult it is for me to control my thoughts, but what happens to me and how I'm feeling inside, where my energy is going when my thoughts are spinning like this. So it's really not, and this is one of the big myths about mindfulness. And the thing that I hear more often than not is I can't meditate, I can't do mindfulness because I can't turn my head off.
Yes.
And so whenever I'm working with someone new, the work is always great, because what we're not trying to do is to stop ourselves from thinking. We're not trying to, become blissed out Zen.
Yeah.
That's really not what it's about. It's about creating the awareness of what's going on inside. How are we feeling in the body?
Yeah.
How is that showing up in the body? What's going on in the mind? Because when you're aware of it, it's like the analogy I give. That scene in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy and her friends make it to this to the wizard's big chamber, and Toto pulls back the curtain on the wizard, and all they see is this relatively, harmless old man pushing buttons, pulling levers, and even when the curtain's been pulled back, he still tries to keep up the pretense for a bit, talking into this voice-changing microphone. But that moment the curtain's pulled back is they look at him and they go, oh, it's not scary anymore.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the same effect anymore because I can clearly see what's going on. And it's a bit like that. Whenever we stop and we go, okay, so what's going on for me right now? And with the practices of meditation, you learn to see that with much more clarity. It's still going on, but it doesn't have that same effect.
Yeah, and you can allow those thoughts to, you can sort of acknowledge those thoughts and be fascinated with them rather than letting them control you. Essentially what you're saying is switching off the autopilot.
Exactly.
And putting a circuit breaker in so that there isn't that automatic response.
It really is that.
But the thing I like about what you've said is you're normalising what somebody's experiencing, because they're almost expecting they're going to have to be this, as you say, this sort of Zen guru. And therefore they're not seeing, they're getting frustrated because they're not, I can ill afford this time anyway. I'm trying it out and I've got a busy mind. So this isn't working. I start to get impatient. So that energy is in itself is quite difficult to deal with. Because that's what I'm really trying to get to here, Paul. And I think you're touching on this, because we're trying to encourage people we're not necessarily speaking to an audience of Zen masters here. We're speaking to a lot of busy.
Exactly.
A lot of people listening to this podcast are business people with busy lives, heard about this and kind of know maybe they flirted with it a bit, maybe they've done a little bit of it. Even as you're speaking now, I know I've done some of this practice and I've done tried a bit of meditation, but I drift in and out of it. But even as you're speaking now, it's reminding me exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm right, Paul, I seem to remember you telling me that you in fact, you had a career in investment banking. You were at JP Morgan, so that's a cut and thrust world, busy lives, and you're not, you didn't climb down from a very tall mountain in robe and then suddenly start teaching mindfulness. You in fact come from a life of a lot of people maybe listening to this. So how on earth did you, what prompted you, and how did you get started with this?
Exactly as you've said, and we've talked about what thoughts might somebody be having if they've got any skepticism about having the time for this. I was that person. Worked in a very busy, I don't know if cutthroat is the right type of environment, but it had that kind of flavour in the nicest possible way. Yeah, and
it's not a sleepy coffee shop.
It's certainly not.
Is it?
Certainly
right,
not.
No.
So I was already working in leadership development in that environment. Certainly
high demand,
high intensity culture.
Yeah.
But what I also was recognising in myself at the time, and back then, we didn't talk about things like well-being. It was all about performance.
Yeah.
So I recognise now, looking back, that for many, many years over my younger life and all through my working life, I think that I was what I describe as a functionally depressed person. So I had really struggled with low moods, but because no one talked about this stuff, and particularly in busy environments like that, I felt that it was just something I needed to do to work on myself. I needed to up my performance. So I became very interested in personal development, and I was learned to become very good at switching it on, changing my state, sorting out my self-talk, all of that, operating in these really busy environments. And it got to the point where I thought, this is what it's all about, because every time I felt like I was really starting to struggle, really starting to suffer with my mood, I had strategies that I could just switch it on and turn it on. And I thought, this is great. I'm going to teach it to others. And my career from JP Morgan went on to being in that arena, and traveling the world, spending time with thousands of people, leaders in their teams, teaching them about leadership, high performance. It was all about goals, achievements. And there was nothing wrong with the strategies that I was teaching at all. They are brilliant at supporting. But what kept happening time and again for me was that in those moments when, the energy lulled a bit, I would go back to being very flat, very, I guess quite depressed, even though I didn't realise that that's what was going on. I just thought there was something wrong with me.
Yeah, so it's almost like under the surface, it's still there, but you'd learn great strategies to not make that visible on the outside. And I think, they're particularly, in the last 20 or so years, there's always, well, actually probably beyond that, but, there's always been that pull yourself together type of attitude, hasn't there? And don't talk about these sorts of things.
Yeah, and I certainly grew up in that kind of culture. Yeah. It was, you just need to pull your socks up and get on with it. And everything kind of came to a head, I would say, probably about 2018. Things were really, on the surface, really successful at work. My wife and I, we had a 1-year-old at home. Things were really busy, but we were having lots of sleepless nights. And it got to the point where the strategies that I was used to using that would help just didn't seem to be helping me, like at that time. And I got to the point where it got so intense, I kind of crashed and burned. And I think that this is I always think of this as being quite an embarrassing story, because I'm the guy that stands in a room teaching people about mindset and performance, and I was still doing that, but it did get to a point where I thought I can't carry on. I need something else. And I'd always known about meditation, and I tried it on and off over the years, but more out of desperation than anything else, something came along, and it just came in the guise of a 30-day meditation challenge, and it was free. So I thought, I'm going to do it because I've just got nothing else to lose. And over the course of that 30 days, I kind of committed to it, and I just noticed some really incredible shifts. In not what I realised I was doing is I was really good at being able to change my state, but what I wasn't really good at was taking care of some of those harder times. And really, mindfulness is being really open to all of life, not just trying to move ourselves into those positive states, and having a better relationship when things aren't going so well.
And what did that 30 days look like? You were a skeptic and then a bit of a convert at the end of it. What did you do day to day?
It was just a 10-minute a day meditation challenge, and each of the meditations were just guiding me through really what mindfulness was all about. And I, at the time, before I started, just was one of those people that think, well, mindfulness, that's just all about clearing your mind, of thoughts, and this is what people do to escape reality. And I started to see that there are some things that you can only see about yourself when you really slow down. And so slowing down, it taught me how to bring my attention back and how to have more control over my attention, because that was all over the place. And when the attention can be gathered and collected to such an extent where you can just start to notice what's going on, you realise that as my concentration started to come back, and I could keep my attention in one place, I could just bring a level of curiosity to what was going on in my mind and in my system, and just start to realise that all these thoughts that are coming in aren't personal. We become so identified with our thinking, and when we're on the go all the time, we're constantly striving. We're never really here. We're always pushing for the next thing, and of course that next thing comes, and then we're looking for the next thing. And I think for me, it was just about really slowing down, seeing things a lot more clearly, and noticing that a lot of the stress that I thought was out there was really just a response to what was going on in here. But I trained myself over the years to keep running away from what was going on in here.
What I'm hearing you say is that it's like the work you used the phrase just now, a distraction from reality, or some words to that effect. But in fact, work is actually a distraction from reality. So the work you were doing and the busyness of the work was keeping you from noticing and being aware of the stress you were having until you had these down moments. Then those feelings would come back. Yeah. So that's what I'm kind of hearing you say.
Yeah, it was exactly that.
There's a lovely book by Anthony DeMello, who's a great sort of spiritual teacher, called Awareness. And he uses a phrase in there where he says awareness itself is curative, which I really, really like.
Yeah.
And I think it really sort of describes what you're talking about. Just the pure awareness of itself, becoming aware, that's what I'm doing, that's what I'm thinking. Actually, the problem's not out there, it's in me. You don't necessarily need a technique to get yourself out of it, do you, at that point?
Exactly. A wonderful phrase is, awareness of anxiety isn't anxious. And so I was carrying around so much anxiety, so much stress, to the point where it became too much and I shut down. And what was exacerbating that, and I think that this is what people do, is they think, oh, this is my anxiety, like this is my stress, it's part of me, and we identify so much with it. And what meditation is fabulous for, and when we apply it in a very mindful way, is that we don't have to try and believe that it's not part of us. We can investigate it, like for ourselves. So stress is there, but it's not me. This is common humanity. This is what we all experience.
And what you're saying is then you're becoming a third party to it.
Well, you become an observer of it. Yeah. And
how does that really help though, Paul? Somebody, because I mean, anxiety is not something that I'm not particularly an anxious individual, but I do know people who are very anxious.
I can do that.
To an extent, I know you can, all right? To an extent where it really does completely occupy them. I mean, fully. And I mean, this is a massive benefit. If people can use what you're talking about to deal with their anxiousness, that would be really something I think because it's a thing, and it's like, it sits with them. It sits in their stomach. I mean, really is. It's like and I know when I felt it myself, I think, geez, I'd hate to be living with these feelings all the time.
Yeah.
But this anxiety point, I think a lot of people listening can really relate to it. When you have it sits heavy, and I'm sure, Paul, you must have people that have come to you with a similar sort of complaint.
Yeah.
That, I think, it might be a really good thing to explore a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when it comes to things like anxiety or, any kind of stress like that, with mindfulness approaches, what we're not looking at doing is exploring people's lives and trying to fix the situations and circumstances of their lives. So it's really about, well, what's going on? When we're feeling anxious, where is that anxiety really coming from? So we work with learning to settle the system. And one of the ways in which we do that, and through a meditative practice, is just teaching people how to start to pay more close attention to things like the sensations in their body, even though it can feel a little uncomfortable to do that. Learning to settle, like focusing on the breath, bring your attention to the breath and just notice the sensations of a breath coming in and the breath coming out. And that then becomes what we call an anchor for your attention. And then when you have the intention to pay attention to something like the breath, or it could be a sound or the feeling of your hands, what you'll quickly notice is that the mind will just pull you away. And there's nothing wrong when that happens.
Or pull you away to the issue or the thought,
it'll pull you away to
anxious.
any kinds of thoughts. It could be planning thoughts, it could be ruminating thoughts, it could be, am I doing this right thoughts. When we know that our attention is intended to be in one place, the mind will quickly pull us away, and the move is just to bring the attention back. And it's that nothing wrong when the mind goes. That's what minds do, and we just bring it back. So when with things like anxiety, what this is teaching us is a couple of things. One is we're starting to build the muscle of having more agency over where our attention goes, because we're training it to stay put, but it's always going to go. It doesn't matter that the mind goes, it's the move of coming back that is that mindful moment. And the more we practice consistently over time, the more it starts to feel familiar, that move of, oh, it's gone, bring it back. It's gone, bring it back.
I think that's really helpful for people that think I'm no good at it because my mind keeps wandering.
Exactly.
It's really powerful that you've said that is what the brain is meant to do and what it's designed to do. And this is just about going, okay, back you come.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like having a puppy.
Yes.
And you want it to sit, and it might sit for a second and then it goes off. But with a puppy, you wouldn't go, oh, come back over here. You go, oh, come back over here. And we nurture it back. And we do that with the mind when the mind goes. So you do it in a very compassionate way. And
rather than getting frustrated about it.
Rather than getting frustrated.
And anxious about it.
So we
and
do it
worried
in a
about
non-judgmental way. We accept that this is what minds are built for.
Yeah.
They think, that it's what's helped us survive for all these.
They're wired that way, aren't
exactly.
they?
So the mind's always going to think.
So what you're really saying is that the natural resting position of the mind is not to stay in the moment.
No.
The resting position of the mind is to be thinking about the next thing. It's almost like that sort of primitive I need to protect myself here. I need to be aware of what's
Looking
going on.
for danger.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what the mind does. So with mindfulness, we're not trying to say, right, it's not about not thinking. It's about there's a world of difference between thinking and being lost in your thinking and thinking and having awareness of knowing that you're thinking. And so one thing is that we're doing is we're training our attention to go where we want it to go, not where it's just going on this automatic pilot all over the place. And after a while, we start to see that, the mind's just doing this. And so, whereas before we were in the thought and we were wrapped up in the thought and we had all of the, associated sensations of worries and anxiety about the thought, we're just seeing, the mind is doing this right now. And then after a while, and it's not an overnight thing. This is why mindfulness is a practice, and we call it a practice for a reason.
Yeah.
Is we start to see, that's just what the mind is doing right now. So it's still doing it, but it doesn't have the same effect. It's like pulling a curtain.
This is an interesting point, because I have known people who have, used one of the apps you were describing, and they go, I'm feeling a bit stressed, stick the app on, right? But they're almost relying on the app or the speaker, the calming voice and the music to do the work.
Yes. Yeah.
That didn't work.
Yeah.
I tried that, it didn't work.
But that's
because they're not actually doing it themselves.
Yeah.
So what you're describing here is them doing it.
Yeah. So
Them
it is
acting on it.
It's a real delicate balance between effort and no effort.
Right.
So, which sounds a bit weird, but in order for us to really settle the system, to be present, it's quite an effortless thing to be. When you get there, you realise there's no effort involved, and that in itself is anxiety relieving and it's stress relieving, because we're not striving, we're not grasping, we're not pushing anything away. We're allowing everything to be here as it is, but I'm not hooked up. I'm not being carried away with it. I've got this sense of balance here, and it takes a little while to get there. And so I always recommend that if someone wants to dip their toe in the water, an app is a great place to start. If we really want to turn this into a way that is useful for our life in the longer term, finding a teacher is the best way to go, because then they can guide you personally. And one of the biggest myths about mindfulness is it's just sitting there emptying the mind, and it's just about just being here. Whereas really what we're looking to do is use the technique of meditation and other on-the-go informal exercises to cultivate certain attitudes like of the mind. And the attitude of acceptance, of allowing, of non-judgment, they sound really easy when you see it written down. You start practicing it, and then you notice just how much the mind does the opposite of all of those things.
And for me, what you're describing is the difference between doing mindfulness, ticking the box, and being mindful. And what I'm hearing is that strengthening the muscle of being mindful helps to turn the colour down on some of those anxious thoughts and stories when they present themselves over time.
Exactly. And whether it's for anxiety or whether it's for leaders in busy organisations, when you have that felt experience of seeing what's going on in a calm way, it's that allows you then to put this distance between the automaticity of the mind and what we then do with it. So, it's really about responding wisely rather than blindly reacting. And it's taking that pause, creating that distance, that then we start to see our own patterns, right? The patterns that we didn't see before. And so Martin mentioned earlier, I don't feel like I'm a particularly anxious person. But what I've certainly found with, my clients that wouldn't necessarily say, I'm not anxious, I just want to be a bit better in this area. They start looking at their moment-to-moment experience in this way, and they start recognizing, oh, now I see it. When I'm with my wife and my wife is doing this and my automatic response is that, I can see that that's just coming out of automatic pilot and it's not helping.
And it's not just about dealing with stressful situations or, emotional situations. It can actually be a force for, increased productivity and better working and improved performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much data is saying that where we might think, I haven't got the time to meditate because I'm so busy, I'm so caught up in my busy agenda, but we know that leaders and teams that go through structured mindfulness protocol training end up reporting, I'm making far better decisions. We're more we have much better open communication with each other. We collaborate, we innovate better, and we make fewer mistakes. And so it's like the time that it takes to do it ends up paying back. So many
totally. I did dip into it a couple of months ago, where I did a practice every day. I also said I full of mission. I drifted out of it again. This is going to prompt me to get back into it. But I really could see the benefit. And each day that I did it became easier. Because as I was going into it, I didn't have all sorts of huge expectations and demands upon what needs to happen in order for me to feel this is a good investment of my time. I had to let go of that. And over a period of time, you can see yourself becoming calm. And I think you then reflect on those moments when you see yourself getting a bit stressed about something during the day. It gives you a bit of an anchor point. What would I be like if I was in that meditative type state? How would I be processing that from that position?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is it the same sort of practice for in the moment versus I'm going to sit down and take some time to be mindful?
Are
they the same techniques? Or the different ones?
What you're doing is pretty much the same, but we have what we call a formal practice versus an informal practice. So the formal practice is what you classically think of when you think of meditation. It's you sit down, you stop what you're doing with the sole intention of bringing attention to what's going on. And that's what I'd call the training ground. And they're really, we don't meditate to get better at doing meditation. We meditate to get better at doing our lives. So the benefits that we get from meditation start spilling over into our daily routines and actions. And sometimes it can be very subtle. You're not going to see suddenly you're a different person because you meditated for 10 minutes on day one. It's, over time, you just notice yourself doing things in a slightly different way and responding in a I guess a more skillful way than you would have done before.
Triggered, maybe.
Exactly. You might look back and think, oh yeah, I did handle that a bit better. But then we also have these informal practices, which is just doing things mindfully on the go, which is you're not changing anything about your daily routine, but you just have the intention to pay really close attention to it while you're doing it. And I'm often suggesting to my clients, pick some innocuous task like making a cup of coffee, having a shower, brushing your teeth in the morning. And rather than like in meditation where you focus on the breath And then when the mind goes away, you bring it back to the breath. This time you're thinking, right, I'm going to pay as much attention as to the sensory experience of this as I possibly can. So from turning the tap on, hearing the water coming out, seeing the water, the smell of the toothpaste, the sensations of the brush on the and it's that all of that is a replacement for the breath. And you notice that I want my intention to be on there, but my mind quickly goes away, but I'm just going to calmly bring it back. I'm going to bring it back. And what that also does is it helps you to become a lot more embodied in what you're doing. So I think one of the things that we really struggle with a lot in today's manic society is that we're going around living our lives in our heads, and it's almost like we've lost this sense of connection with the body at all.
But with a detrimental impact on
Exactly. And it does a couple of things. One is it causes us to worry and stress even more, but it also, when we're not physically aware of our bodies, is that we're not getting the signals from our bodies that are telling us that something's a little bit off that we might need to address.
Is there anything that we can do right now to practice
mindfulness 101 in the moment, I would say, is any moment you can take a pause and just take a mindful breath. And a mindful breath would be stop what you're doing, like feel your feet on the floor. Can you get a feeling of your feet in your shoes? Get a sense of the body is actually being supported and grounded by the floor. You can feel the floor underneath. Might feel your feet in your shoes, and just get a sense of being supported by the ground. And then you might bring that awareness a bit further up into the body, maybe feel the legs. Bring it up and feel, the torso, the shoulders, the arms. Just getting a sense of the whole body together. And then notice that as you're aware of the body, that the body's also breathing. It's breathing all the time, and we never really pay attention to the fact that it's breathing. So just taking a moment to bring your attention to the sensations of the breath coming in, a full breath in, and then feeling it as it comes out. And what a lot of people do in the beginning is they start to think about the breath. Oh yeah, I am breathing. And the invitation is, can you feel the breath? The sensations of, maybe the stomach expanding or the chest rising, coming up and going out. And a lot of people might notice that even when the first time they do this, even for the first time, it is enough for the mind to start wandering off and thinking about other stuff.
I automatically go, am I breathing right? Is it deep enough?
Exactly.
It's very calming, though.
It's very calming.
Really
it's
very calming, very, very quickly.
Exactly. Yeah. And my question often is, as your mind is on the breath and your attention's on the breath, even though it was only for a few seconds, what was happening in your mind? Now, some people, their mind does go off, but most of the time is, when my attention's there, I notice that the mind's really quiet. Because the attention's here, so there's nothing going on up here. And the more we can do that, the more we can get a sense of what that feels like to put my attention on something, then and this is how we start to train the mind to calm. So it doesn't necessarily change all of the stuff going on in our life or the fact that we still have anxious feelings in the body, but now I can become aware of them. And being aware of them is very different to being caught up in our thoughts and stories about that stuff.
So if someone was feeling anxious and they were doing this, what might they expect? What might they experience?
So with anxiety, I might often suggest that we don't focus on the breath because the breath could be triggering, in that if someone's particularly anxious. So I might say, put your attention somewhere else, like on a sound or the sensation of your hands.
Because of like a panic attack type
exactly.
sensation.
And it depends. We'd have to be quite, use a bit of discernment in those moments. But when someone's feeling anxious, by bringing a few moments of pause and calm is enough just to unhook from the swirl that's been going on, that's been creating that anxiety in them. And it might be that afterwards I still feel like this, but that distance that I've placed from it is enough for me to just stop it from swirling even more. And over time, with consistent practice, we might start to notice that the anxiety diminishes over time. Yeah, so yeah.
That's really powerful, just in those few seconds, you know, the effect. And my mind's, you know, always going 10 to the dozen, but I can honestly say in that 2 minutes, 1 minute, I was just focusing on what you were telling me to do.
But it is. I've done a similar thing where you sit quietly and listen to sounds. You were talking about sounds. I think that's actually quite a good thing. When you pay attention to the sounds in your immediate environment, then you pay attention to sounds that are slightly outside of your environment, and then much further. And it's amazing the amount of sounds you start to pick up.
Yeah.
But the whole process of doing that is, again, I guess it brings your as you were saying earlier, you're not allowing your mind to wander. You're now driving it. So
you can do that, can't you, when you go for a walk? You know, rather than, I mean, sometimes, quite often, I've got a podcast on, but sometimes, or at least for a portion of the walk, I take that and then just listen to what's you know, what's going on around me and what I can hear. And it's amazing the range of different sounds that you can hear.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, and you know, this is what happens, is being present and, you know, not being lost in the past or in the future generally tends to be, you know, quite a multi-sensory experience right now. You know, how do we know that we're being present? Because I can feel, I can taste, I can touch, I can, you know, I can see. Yeah.
Okay. So what can someone do as they're going through their sort of busy days? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I bought along a prop.
Have
you? Yeah. I thought we'd try a little exercise.
Okay.
So this is what we call a raisin exercise, and so I'm going to ask you to, you know, I think there's raisins, cranberries, different things in there, but if you pull out one of those,
right?
Now,
just one,
just one single raisin.
Oh, I seem to have pulled out a bunch all stuck together. I will detach them.
Martin's pulled out a cluster.
I do like a little cranberry, so I don't
So,
know on there.
If we take something like eating, for example, eating is one of those things that we each do every day, and it's probably one of those times in the day where we're doing something and our mind isn't always on what we're doing. So I know, for example, that if I'm not being intentional about it, I'll sit down with a sandwich or a dinner, my mind's on something else and I'm just eating away and I have no idea what's going on. Could finished a plate and barely tasted it.
Yes.
And so if this is just one example of an everyday activity, and there are many everyday activities that we go through, I'm going to demonstrate what a mindful approach would be using something like a raisin. I'm going to follow along.
Okay.
With you. So, no, first question: Do you particularly like raisins?
I'm quite fond of
I
raisins,
do.
actually.
I've actually got I think it's a cranberry, and I like cranberries.
Yeah.
That's great. So the reason I ask is because oftentimes when I do this exercise, you might get someone going, "Oh," and that response of "oh" is the first thing to start paying attention to, because the exercise is we're going to be eating this raisin, and if you might notice that there's I quite like a raisin.
I'm going
ooh.
Yeah, as opposed to ah. Yeah.
So if we just first of all, just like to place the raisin in your palm like that. And the first thing we're going to do is just to look at it. And I want you to look at it as if you've never seen a raisin before. So this is what we call having a beginner's mind. So in reality, you've seen millions of them probably. You've probably eaten loads of them. But this time we're going to look at it as if it's for the first time. And what do you notice about this? Is if you were spotting this for the first time, just think about what would you notice?
It's quite shiny.
Yeah, mine's shiny. I can see light glinting off of it.
It looks dead.
It's definitely not alive.
It's definitely dead.
It actually looks a little bit like a piece of plastic.
Yes, interesting. And you might take a bit of the shape and the colour, because I notice mine. I think of raisins being kind of brown, but when I look at this, I can see there's a lot more going on in there.
It's quite translucent, actually.
Yeah.
You can sort of almost see the colours inside it.
Yeah. And if you pick it up with the other hand, just kind of like roll it around in your fingers and just really see if you can tune into the sense of what the texture of it is like between your fingers.
Soft.
Very wrinkly.
Bit soft, wrinkly.
Mine's
Some
quite
bits are
hard.
soft. Yeah, some bits are hard. Now, this is going to sound a bit weird as well, but if you bring it up to your ear, does a raisin have a sound?
Not if
you
it's dead.
roll it around, squish it a little bit between your fingers.
Oh, yeah.
Never knew that raisin had a
No,
sound.
you can
before.
definitely hear the moisture
Yeah.
sort of sounds inside this one.
Yeah.
It
And then
feels soft now, not looking at it.
it's strange, isn't it? So
Yeah.
you're not looking at it and it feels a
Feels
bit
softer.
softer. Yeah,
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
Maybe that's because you've just squished it around so much.
Or you're actually going to have to put these squished up things in your
Yeah, I
mouth.
know, it's a bit disgusting, isn't it? But and that's something we can pay attention to as
Yeah.
well. Oh, my attention's on this, and now I'm thinking
Yeah.
about, am I going to have to do this? And what about the smell?
Oh, yeah.
Metally.
Metally, you've got a cranberry there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a strong smell to mine when I notice it. Now, what we're going to, and before we pop it into our mouths, and I'm going to be asking you to do this in, not just pop it in your mouth and start chewing and swallowing straight away, but another thing that we could think of with just something as simple as a raisin is this raisin as it is now has probably been on a bit of a journey. It didn't start off as a raisin. It would have started off, well, at one point it would have been on a plant, probably as a grape.
Indeed.
And then it went through a process to become a raisin. Someone had to pick it. It's been transported.
Yeah.
It's been through so many processes. And so just nothing really to do with that. Just being curious that this thing that we could easily take for granted right now, what's the journey of that and the story of that? Right, and now, okay, so if you just going to ask you to, I'm going to do this as well, and this is getting really hard because I've got to talk while I'm doing this. But if you just place it on your tongue and don't do anything. Now, what do you notice? Now it's on your tongue.
Yeah.
You're probably noticing different things going on. There may be a taste, a bit of an aroma, but there's also what's your tendency, what's your urge
Yeah.
Chew it.
to want to do. You can feel that there's the urge to chew it.
Like the Malteser test.
It is, yeah. And it's just becoming curious of, I notice that when this happens, I get the urge too. Okay, so you can roll it around and notice, I'm noticing as I do that, for me, even though I've not chewed it yet,
Flavour comes.
the flavour starts to come. And now if you start to,
Like a wine gum.
yeah, it is a bit like that. And I can see you're already chewing yours, Martin.
Really?
Right, so if you
No.
bite into it, you just notice what it feels like to bite into it, the resistance of the teeth going in, and what that does to the flavour and the different sensations in the mouth.
Oh, yeah.
And then
Massive
feel
release
free
of-
to,
Wow.
yeah, and then there's a explosion of flavour, I've noticed. Okay, so then you can chew. And just notice, whenever you're ready, just feel, when you feel ready to swallow, see if you can really pay attention to the movements of the mouth as you swallow. And then you might even be able to feel it, like going down the back of your throat.
It's amazing
So-
the intensity of the flavour
It's-
when you pay attention to
It's
it.
incredible, isn't it? Well, I it's different experience for different people as well. So,
Yeah.
curious, there's lots of things that we can pull out of what we were doing to pay attention in that way. So, just curious as
Who
to,
would have known you have so much joy eating a single
No.
raisin? But I get your point.
Yeah.
You become very aware of lots more things, and particularly the intensity of the flavour
Yeah.
and the texture.
yeah,
And I'm doing that with a whole meal. I'm going to try that this evening. I mean, I do tend to
Take your
always put my... Yeah, I mean, I do have a very hungry husband next to me that tends to not even take a breath. But I always do tend to put my knife and fork down in the middle of every mouthful.
yeah.
So I'm going to pay more attention
Yes.
to all the rest of it as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that I give to my client, I give them some homework, which would be to, at least once a week, sit down and have a really mindful meal and do exactly the same thing. So it's the aromas, the taste, all of that. But it's not just about the reason for doing the exercise isn't about just eating. If that raisin was just a metaphor for how many things do we do each day and really not have that kind of level of awareness. We just do it on automatic
That's
pilot.
what I was going to ask. What was the real point of that exercise? Is to bring your attention to how many more sensations there are in the moment, making you more mindful.
And not
good
just the sensations, and not just what it was like to eat the raisin, but what you're also noticing is I put the raisin on my tongue and instantly I had the urge to do this. And I found it really difficult to resist. Now, I don't know how many raisins you've eaten like in your lifetime, and we never really noticed
Quite
how...
a lot in wine.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of my clients say raisins are just wasted wine. So by doing exercises like that, or you could swap the raisin out for brushing your teeth or going for a walk in nature, which is a fabulous way to do it, is even that, it's not changing anything about your day. You're not having to spend more time doing different things. But when you approach your tasks in that way, it's creating that level of mindful awareness and agency. So that combined with things like meditation, we're really starting to strengthen the that ability to choose our responses rather than keep reacting.
And with all of this, as we set out at the beginning of the podcast, you're living with less stress. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, because in those moments when we're being aware, we notice that we're not actually stressed in that moment. We may be feeling sensations, but because we've unhooked from the story and the spinning mind and all of that, we're not judging it. We're allowing it to be there. We notice, I can be with this moment, and because all we've got is moments, right? And I can. We relate to the past and the future as if they're actual things. You know, we've already moved from something, but it's still there somehow, and the future's over there. I just haven't quite got there. What this allows us to do is really get that felt experience that this is it. And when my attention's here, it's amazing how able I am to be with this. And the more we can do that, the less stressful.
I love the analogy of unhooking from something. I think that's really powerful. We've talked about the fact that the workplace is a cause of a fair bit of stress for individuals. What can leaders and organisations do to create an environment that supports mindfulness?
Yeah, I think it's such an important question because so much of our lives are wrapped up in work. And I think when it comes to creating mindful environments, it's really important that that mindfulness isn't a course that we send employees on as our well-being strategy. It has to be a lot more holistic than that. And so I'm quite passionate, particularly about working with leaders first, because leaders, set such a tone, really set the culture. So I think when leaders are able to find their own pauses in practice and have some guidance in practice, that's a brilliant place to start. And things that leaders can do and organisations can do is things like at the beginning of meetings is rather than just launching straight into the agenda of the day, is to take a moment to do a bit of a check-in with people. You may not necessarily do, everyone, we're going to sit down and meditate for 5 minutes before we do this meeting. But you can take a bit of a pause and just kind of, set the tone, check in, and have a real, genuine, non-judgmental curiosity about what's going on for people.
I read an article about something very similar yesterday, and they call it a minute to arrive.
At
the beginning of a meeting, and set the tone in terms of how you want to show up. And how you want to show up as a collective as well. I love that.
Exactly. And I think in the busyness of our days, we have all these transitionary moments, don't we, between when we're finishing one task and we're just going on to a next, or it might be between Zoom calls, is using those transitionary moments to have a bit of a pause and a check-in with yourself, to reset your intention, think, how is it that I want to show up for this next call? You might take a moment to take a few mindful breaths just to separate from where your attention was on the last thing and going into the next agenda. And And also with, what are we doing culturally to make sure that folks are looking after themselves, is, when it comes to just simple things like taking a proper break.
Yes.
And as a leader, as a teacher, I encourage those that are leading teams not just to make breaks available, but to really encourage it where folks go and take their lunch break, but they're not allowed to be focusing on work. They're not allowed to be taking their phones with them. Get outside, go for a walk. And it's not, we're not enforcing it as a policy, but recognising the value of what that does for individuals, but also what it does collectively for productivity and collaboration and creativity.
And I think that's really important as well as, and I am definitely, guilty of this, is that when you're working from home, you just sit there, don't you, and you crack on, and before you know it, it's, the day's gone quickly and you haven't actually moved from your desk. So, there's in the workplace, but also in the virtual workplace as well.
Yeah, it's such a big thing. Thing.
You see so many leaders with their, we talked about this in our productivity podcast, that they think that, shall we have a break or should we just crack on?
Yeah.
And they think that, let's just push through, drive through. And I just think, no, this is like a false economy, because the quality of thinking, quality of decision making, quality of thought, creativity all deteriorates because people are tired.
Yeah.
If you take a break, even if for 5 minutes, where people can just go outside, get some fresh air, decompress, they come back and they've got more vitality, ideas, creativity, and the job, you actually speed up as a result of that.
Yeah.
So it, as you say, Lisa, it's actually, you need to remind yourself to do that.
Yeah.
A lot of these apps and things, that's what they do.
Yeah.
I know in my Aura Ring, where you have one as well. That reminds you to take a break. You haven't moved.
Yeah, the Apple, the Apple Watch.
So the point is that it's not just made up stuff here. There is there's science.
Such science.
There's so much science behind it.
Yeah, and I think the real important thing is, yes, make sure you take a break, but it's what you are doing with that break that really makes the difference.
If you take a break to check your phone.
Yeah, exactly. And who does? How many of us do that?
And then your mind is on something else. You're not actually.
Yeah, you're just filling it rather than emptying.
It's like I often, for myself, if I take a break or if I take the dog for a walk, there is a tendency sometimes not to utilise that time for what it really should be, and that is to take a break, go into nature.
Yeah.
End up sticking a podcast on, or which I do enjoy doing, and I get a lot from that. But even these short breaks, I'll make a phone call to somebody, and I think, right, leaving my phone at home is quite a hard practice.
It really is,
because then you have to notice the trees and the birds and
and I love that you called that a practice, because leaving the phone at home is going to be really uncomfortable. And on that walk, you're practicing being present, but you're also practicing being with the discomfort of having the phone at home. And this is really, one of the big benefits of a consistent practice like this, is because we learn how to have a much wider window of tolerance when we experience discomfort. And I think busy leaders that have such incredibly difficult jobs, not only leading teams, but a lot of times that's done remotely, they've got more things to think about than ever before. They are a cocktail of discomfort.
Yeah.
And what we're not good at is we're not good at relating to our discomfort, which is why we're so reactive all the time. Yeah. But when we learn to recognise, I can be with this, and I can't be with this story of the discomfort, but I can be with this sensation of discomfort in this moment. That's what we're training our minds to do.
So what you're saying, mindful leadership is then twofold, isn't it? It's what the leader is doing to be mindful themselves and the environment that they create to give others the opportunity to build mindfulness.
Exactly.
Yeah, what's the environment they're creating for other people? Yeah. Are they creating an online environment, particularly online, when you don't have that, connection between people and the, brain chemical oxytocin, and we all know about the benefits of that. if you're just crashing through an agenda,
Yeah.
you're hardly getting a visual on somebody. You're not necessarily involving them. It's a and that's incredible. I mean, you know, the science will prove this, that your stress levels over the course of that day, you know, continue to rise.
Yeah.
You're cramming more and more and more meetings in.
Yeah.
And over a long period of time, it's not like a day, is it? It's 2 days, 3 days, it's a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. You know, it's months on end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just,
There's no
just
respite.
no way can that be healthy.
No, and this
We weren't
is
designed to do that.
We are not designed to
No.
do that. We're designed for short bursts of intensity
Yeah.
and recovery.
Yeah.
And so what we know, the research term and the scientific term that's given to it now is, we call it allostatic load, which is where a new stress comes along and we feel the discomfort of that, but we adapt. And then another stress comes along and we adapt, and we're constantly adapting to the stress. And because we adapt, we feel like we've got a handle on it, and we're okay, and then we're not.
That brings
then it
exactly perfectly
crashes.
back to,
Yeah.
to your example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
and your personal
Yeah.
experience.
And, you know, and culturally wise, this is why I'm so passionate about working with leaders, because I think this is where it starts. If leaders can have a handle on their own experience of their days, it helps them to make better decisions about how they operate. And because over time we end up operating from a sense of choice, a sense of agency, and a sense of greater calm, when we're in that state, we tend to treat others a lot better as well. You know, it stands to reason, doesn't it? When we're stressed out and we're up against it, how do we treat other people, even if it's unintentionally?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
You're going to make better decisions. You're going to
more
be more
empathy.
creative.
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly,
Definitely more empathy,
exactly.
for sure.
And we know that as mindfulness goes up, so does compassion as well.
yeah.
And compassionate workplaces, I think, where everyone feels that we each have our best interests at heart,
Yes.
tend to be more productive, tend to be just do much better things collectively.
But you end up sort of leaning into someone else's world, don't you?
Yeah.
Because you've got the patience, you've got more patience.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're more mindful, as you say. You're more in the moment. You're a better listener. People feel, because they feel listened to, they feel more valued. They feel validated by whatever they're saying, and that leads to ultimately higher levels of engagement, which leads to higher levels of productivity, and blah blah. And the list goes on. We was actually at an event yesterday, a leadership event, well, a leadership roundtable we hosted in Manchester with some regional business leaders, and not surprising, you know, the main topic of the conversation came round to engagement and how people are feeling, and what it requires from individual leaders, and then I'm going to use the term leadership. What's the flavour of leadership here? You know, are you giving me permission to, 1, be vulnerable, 2, talk about how I'm feeling, 3, ask you questions? What is that environment? Or is it performance, results?
Yeah.
And we were discussing the fact that, you know, the desire to want to produce high performance leads to high pressure.
Yeah.
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 And then that actually is, you know, it hinders your progress rather than actually helping your progress. So
absolutely.
it's a bit like, it almost reminds me of, to take the analogy with safety. When you think about being safe, we did a big project on safety. In fact, you were involved in that project many years ago. And we showed the direct correlation between being safe and more productive. But safety generally is associated with slowing down, right?
Yeah.
But actually it makes you quicker,
Yeah.
more efficient,
Yeah.
when you do things in a safe manner, and you get a good habitual way of behaving.
Yeah.
So this is almost like that, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
counterintuitive.
And this is where so many of the misconceptions come from, because it is so counterintuitive.
Yes.
It goes against the grain,
Yeah.
and it goes against, I think, you know, if we've got two cultures inside our own heads, I've got the stress culture and I've got the calm culture.
Yeah, yeah.
The stress culture is winning at
Yes,
the moment, and
every
the stress
time.
culture is
Yeah.
very cynical
Yeah.
about the calm culture.
Yeah, it's a nice way of putting it. I like that.
But I like your link to,
Yeah.
you know, the safety message, because you are trying to create safety
Yeah.
within the craziness.
Yes, yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
separating you from the craziness, and
Exactly.
responding in a different
And
way.
we know that We know what happens in organisations that feel psychologically safe. Where does that psychological safety come from? It comes from the culture set by leadership. That can only happen when leaders themselves are feeling safe within themselves. And that's really what this practice is all about. That may sound really soft, and you might want to switch out the word safety for, I just want to feel really in control and have a sense of agency over my world. But that then it really does have that ripple effect into the team, into the business, into the culture, into the clients.
I think that's quite an important point there about language. Because a lot of what we're using here, the language associated with it, it can, for someone who is living in that sort of stressful existence and is caught up in the world of stress equals good, stress equals, faster, that's the world of business. And
exactly.
The language we use, being in the moment, being calm, these aren't words associated with performance, but they actually are.
Yeah,
they actually are. They actually are.
Yeah.
That's what producers who do. Talk sports performance.
Well, I think this is exactly why it took me so long to get switched on to mindfulness when I could have been benefiting from it years before. Is because I have this almost allergic reaction to poetic, flowery, floaty language, and so every time I
tree huggers
saw something like meditation, it was combined with phrases like, "Oh, you need to own your power and stand in your truth," and I'm like, I don't use that language, and that doesn't mean anything to me. So I think that mindfulness is it's just such a human thing that it isn't reserved for some folks and not the others. It's something that we all have a deep capacity for. We just need to invest a bit of time and attention.
I think
in
a
learning
hugely important thing for us to cultivate within our children as well. We talked about leaders and teams, parents and children. Their lives are only going to get fuller and fuller and busier and busier. So anything that we can do to share these sorts of techniques.
Yes, absolutely. It's wonderful to see the explosion of mindfulness in schools at the moment, and kids are brilliant to work with. Now, what I think kids have going for them that we tend to lose as we get older is that kids are much more naturally present. Doesn't mean they're mindful, but they're very present. And if we can just cultivate that presence, then fantastic. So I think, I've got a 6-year-old, and, how I bring mindfulness into my relationship with him is we do it through a lot of play. And so, there's an acronym which I've been taught around mindful parenting, which is PACE, which is playful, accepting, curious, and empathy. So it is like looking at their world through play, and whatever they present, being really accepting of it, being so curious about what's going on in their mind, and then whatever it is that you find is just having empathy for it. It's just, this makes sense. So I don't get my little boy to sit down and meditate. But when I'm doing the bedtime routine and I'm getting him to settle down, we say, should we blow out the candles? To get, so blowing out the candles is deep breath in, and blow it out. So it's teaching him about the breath, and it's teaching him about all of these kinds of things, but doing it in a very child-friendly way. And it's all just get them used to their senses and being able to describe words for their feelings as well. Being able to verbalise their feelings is huge.
You're right. Children, if they had a watch on, it would just say now, wouldn't it? It's now.
I've always wanted to get one.
I completely get that, and I think the point you're saying is that you need to utilise that. Utilise that. But there's a lot of lessons we can learn from that. Ourselves. Yeah, this is. I enjoyed this last bit of the conversation, because I think particularly for the corporate audience, it is something you have to get yourself convinced of. Because the very act of doing it is the complete opposite. It is, and that is the struggle. I think that is the struggle with it. But I can't recall the facts off the top of my head, but I know I have read the science behind things like 5 minutes of mindfulness every day over an extended period of time, and the incredible impact it has on pre and post stress tests.
Yeah.
You know, I know there are lots of studies on that.
Well, the chemistry in the brain carries on for a long time after those 5 minutes. And if you're repeating that day after day after day, we know about brain plasticity. And we're creating the grooves in the neural pathways that then start to create the new...
This is definitely like the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza. You know, he's just Placebo Effect and other books he's written. He's created such a... there's so much science behind around the stuff he's done around, as you say, that what you just said there about the benefits continue long beyond the actual practice itself, particularly the cumulative impact of doing it. Not just once. I did. You know, I'm going to do my mindfulness practice on a Saturday morning when I've got lots of time.
Exactly.
You know, it doesn't quite work that way, does it?
It becomes another thing you've got to fit in with the gym and
the phrase I use all the time with my clients is short moments many times.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And so it's far better to punctuate your day with these little moments of mindfulness than it is to meditate for an hour once a week. It's the little and often is the approach. And with and even 2,500 years ago, we talk about brain plasticity now. I think this is what the Buddha was talking about years ago, and he said what we frequently think about and ponder upon becomes the inclination of the mind. And so it's just an invitation to think, what do I frequently think about? What do I frequently ponder about? Because that is becoming the habit of how I'm running my life. And, just those moments to stop and be more intentional about that starts to carve it in a different direction.
I can definitely see how this can change your neural pathways, the thinking, and how... so what you're really saying is, left to its own devices, the mind will, if you train it, will worry less. Because you trained it in that way.
It's the same with like the puppy, isn't it? Eventually the puppy learns to sit and learns to...
And the thing is, the way I see it, we're always practicing something anyway. And it just might be that we're practicing how to become brilliant at worrying.
Yes.
Well,
I think that's the default.
I think about what you said earlier, that your point around the stress culture. What was the word you used?
So we got stress culture, calm culture.
Yeah, right. I really like that, because I think the you don't need any training on being more stressful.
No.
That's a default system. That is something you will default to, because that's what the main operating principle of the brain is, to protect yourself and keep yourself safe from danger. So the act of moving from that stress culture to a calm culture does require some behavioural effort on your part. And that's why I think, coming back to this idea of listening to a calm app or whatever is going to help you, but it's not necessarily going to rewire you, because you're putting the responsibility of making myself calm with the teacher. That teacher's not very good. You're not helping me. The voice is annoying, too squeaky or whatever. It doesn't work. I tried those apps; they don't work.
I just fell asleep.
And I obviously I may sound biased because I'm a teacher, but the reason I'm a teacher is because I know the value of what it's like to have a good teacher guiding you through these things. If it's an app that gets you started, fantastic. But when it comes to, there is something really valuable sitting on the other side of me getting this right, then get someone...
So with that in mind, and I do know you to be, I can vouch for you being a very empathic teacher, how can people engage with you on this? What do you have to help them?
Well, for folks to just start to dip their toe into what this is about, you feel free to hop onto my website. I've got a free 7-day course where folks can start to learn what meditation is about, learn a bit more about what mindfulness is about. So the website is pauldalton.coach.
We'll put links in our notes as well.
Cool. And and I offer programs. So I have a 12-week program called Mindfulness-Based Resilience and Flourishing. I work with clients one-to-one, and that can be anything from 4 weeks to 8-12 weeks ongoing. And I'm also putting the finishing touches to more of a corporate leadership offering as well, because I think that is where my passion really is working with leaders to create these, to create these really strong cultures in the workplace. So,
well, I'm feeling quite calm.
I'm feeling very calm. I'm feeling. I'll tell you what I'm feeling. I'm feeling sold on the idea.
I am.
That is the
totally
key
sold
thing.
on the idea.
My work here is done.
And I really, my big wish for our listening audience is that they become, as you say, encourage them to go to that next step. At least give it. I would encourage people to go to Paul's website. I know you've worked very hard on this. I've been working alongside you for some time, and you've been putting a lot of effort and energy into this, and you've done the hard yards yourself and the training and etc. So you've been in good hands with Paul. Do reach out to him, and if there's something of interest to you, I encourage them to do that.
Yeah, and absolutely. And we'll, if you don't mind, Paul, we'll draw some of the things and the techniques that you've talked about into something that the listeners could download.
Yeah,
but obviously
of course.
Provide the links to your website and all of your resources as well.
Excellent.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much for taking
Any
the time.
final thoughts on this subject, Paul?
I would say go dip your toe into the water with mindfulness. Give the only way to experience it is to experience it, and just give it a go, but be willing to give it a fair crack at the whip in the early stages. And I think that you'll be very pleasantly surprised about what you find. And my dream is that more of us become a lot more mindful over time.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you.
And as with always, if you've heard something today which you feel that is of value to you and has prompted you to think in a different way, we really encourage you to share the podcast. Remember that you are doing somebody good if you do that. One small idea can make a big change for them. So do share, and of course, as always, leave any comments about ideas, further ideas on this subject.
Yeah, other strategies you've used. It's good
exactly.
for the whole community to share.
Lisa, what do we have coming up next?
Very good question. The next episode is going to be around crushing limiting beliefs.
Ooh.
So quite a heavy
like
and
crushing
extremely
beliefs.
practical one.
Yep, this is an area of huge interest to me. I would say a bit of a speciality. A reasonable crusher of beliefs. Unuseful ones I'm talking about, right? So yes, if you want your limiting beliefs crushed to be replaced with more empowering ones, then definitely come and have a listen. Very, very powerful and makes a huge difference to how we behave on a daily life.
Yeah, look forward to that.
Yes.
I'll bring my limiting beliefs with me.
Please do. Be ready to crush them. Excellent. Thank you. See you next time.
Bye.